In the last video, these are for October 19th, October 20th. We talked about the domain and range and the relationship between the domain and range for arc, sine, and sine. And the reason that relationship happens is because these two functions are inverses. If you have questions, go back to that previous video or ask me. I would love to answer those questions. I'm going to go ahead and flip to the back. Here is everything for arc sine, arc cosine, and arc tangent. So if you want to pause and write this down, I'm going to go ahead and jump in it so the video doesn't stay too long. But what's happening here is, again, sine and arc sine, they are inverses. They undo each other. Similar thing with cosine and arc cosine. They are inverses. Tangent and arc tangent. They are inverses. Because they are inverses, the range for sine will become the domain for arc sine. What should also happen is that the domain should become the range. The domain should become the range. Similar thing here. Range became domain. Range became domain. But the domain did not become the range in its entirety. Here we talked about it with arc sine, but the concept is the exact same for arc cosine. Here, the range is 0 to pi and not negative infinity to infinity. Here, the range is negative pi over 2 to pi over 2 and not this. Why? For each of these. For each of these three. I'm just going to write it over here on the side. Okay. Let me erase this. The key thing is that the range for arc sine, for arc cosine of x, and for arc tangent of x, the range for each of those functions is shortened. In other words, it's not negative infinity to infinity, negative infinity to infinity. X can equal these. We shorten the range for the inverse functions. So the range is shortened so that each of these guys are functions. If we did not shorten the range, none of those would be functions, which is why we had to shorten the range to make sure that they are functions. That's the key, one of the very key pieces from what we did today in class. Now, I don't expect if you weren't in class for you to understand fully what we did in class and what's happening. So if you're doing this and you weren't in class, please come in, ask questions about what's going on. We'd love to answer questions. Also, essentially, we got to this in some classes. We didn't get to all of it in all of my classes, all the classes. But this here is a writing prompt that will be on the next assessment. On the next assessment, the first question, I'm going to expect you to explain the relationship between the domain and range for cosine and the domain and range for arc cosine. Essentially that the domain and range flipped. The range became the domain became the range. However, you should also be able to describe the restriction for arc cosine, meaning that the range did not actually become negative infinity to infinity because we had to shorten it so that it is a function. Again, definitely ask questions. If you have them over this, we'd love to answer them. I want to make sure that everyone understands what's going on here before you take the assessment. So please make sure you ask questions if you have any questions about what is going on.